Cool. Well, welcome everyone. So glad to see folks here. My name's Zach Sadiq. I am autistic and I work at the Arc of King County as the Disability Systems Navigation Coordinator. I'm someone who's very passionate about, just centering voices of people with disabilities on all matters that might have an impact on our lives. And, these webinars are a really great way to do that. So, before I launch into the spiel about the webinar, please let us know if there's anything we can do to make attending this more accessible. Feel free to send me a message in chat if you want. This panel's scheduled to last for about an hour and a half. And trying to think what else I might need to tell y'all. Yeah, we'd love to take audience questions. We're planning on doing a Q&A at the end. And we're also, if we get really, really interesting questions, through chat, we might meander over to some of those and then jump back to the planned questions. Yeah, I guess that's everything I wanted to say. Y'all please do what you need to do to take care of yourselves during this panel. You don't have to have your camera on if you don't want to. Y'all are welcome to just stand up, stretch, get a drink of water or anything while we're, doing our thing. So, please do whatever you can to make this, as comfortable for y'all as you can. Cool. Well, let's talk about the panel. So being autistic myself, masking is, I'd say I've got a very complicated experience with it. It's something I have to do in a lot of places where, most folks around me aren't autistic or disabled themselves, and that tends to be in most circumstances. I know it's something that has, caused me a lot of grief and caused me to spend so much more energy than the people around me in, most, any given situations. And I also know at the same time, it's, can allow me access to places where I wouldn't necessarily be able to get access to if wasn't able to mask. So I would describe my relationship with masking as complicated. And I know my experience is only my experience. Masking is going to impact autistic people in so many different ways. And, I just want to hear about the diversity of experiences when it comes to masking. And so I'm lucky that, 3 panelists have, been willing to show up and share their stories and experiences. And so I'm looking forward to hear what y'all have to say. So I guess, how should we do this in order of introductions? Talia, since you're first on my screen, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Talia Glick. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a Seattle native, an artist, and I only began to realize that I was autistic over the last year. So I'm undiagnosed, and I'm looking forward to talking about the experiences that come with being undiagnosed and masking in most settings.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing more about what you have to say on this. Peter, who are you and what are you doing here?
So I'm Peter Young. I use he, him pronouns. I work with Zach at the Arc of King County as the Information Resource Coordinator. I was diagnosed as autistic about 2 years ago, but I've been working with autistics for most of my adult life. I am very passionate about it. I've been frankly lucky enough to do a lot of work running like autism social groups using Dungeons and Dragons and Minecraft and gaming. And that has really given me a really fun insight into kind of the different forms of masking and where masking is painful and where masking can be kind of fun through role playing and stuff. So just kind of rethinking like how to take away some of this the sting and the strain of it by masking as a grumpy dwarf instead.
Oh, you call that masking?
Yeah, I know,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Thanks, Peter. And yeah, your comments about, masking as a form of fun is an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that before. So I'm looking forward to hearing more later on. And last but not least, we have Adam. Adam, who are you and what are you doing here?
I'm Adam. Some people may know me professionally as Tays on Day. I sing, I act, I do voice work. Am I guess I was first diagnosed when it was called Asperger's in the 1990s when I was 15 years old. And I had so many different diagnoses as an adolescent that it just kind of fell by the wayside. And I seriously pursued re-diagnoses about 4 years ago. And so kind of had an awakening as an adult in terms of what it means to be re-diagnosed and how that affects my experience. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Adam. And yeah, that's an important point. Like our experience with our own autism and the world around us is ever evolving and ever changing. And I would imagine it's the same thing with masking as well. So cool. Now that we know who y'all are, let's jump into the questions. And I'll just say for the audience, like if there's anything that like really, really speaks to you that one of the panelists said, like, feel free to use one of your reactions or, feel free to type it in chat. And if you've got any, like follow-up questions based on what was said, you're also welcome to, uh, type it in chat as well. I do see one question from Hope. That's a good one. And I think that's one where we're going to discuss that in a way in our third question, but yeah, stay tuned with that. It's a very good one. So our first question is, what does masking mean to you? So Talia, you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the kind of simplest definition of masking is just trying to fit in and, suppressing habits or parts of yourself that you might have to suppress in order to fit in a social group or in a workspace. But oh, sorry, I lost my notes. 1 second here.
No worries.
What I had written down was also specifically hiding autistic aspects of yourself, like stimming in social settings. And that's been a really big one for me in my journey as I start to kind of process what parts of myself are masking that I didn't know until adulthood were not things that I was doing organically, but things that I had taught myself to do over a number of years. Um, so I think that, masking has to do with trying to stay socially safe in a space, not only to fit in, but also to avoid being singled out as other and to protect yourself to the best of your ability.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good really interesting things there. I think, the idea about masking as a form of social safety, I think is a really important theme that I imagine we'll hear more about. And then just the idea of like, is this something we're doing, consciously or subconsciously, I think is another important question for folks. Yeah, so definitely appreciate that answer. Peter, what about your experiences?
It's there's two sides of it. There is the protective side where, for years and years and years, I would study people. I would just watch them because I didn't have any friends. I would just watch human behavior. I have 2 degrees in social science that I explicitly got to help me, learn how to interact with people. Back when I worked in a much more, people-centric job, I literally felt like I was putting on like knight armor, full on plate armor every single day and just screwing the helmet onto my face. And sometimes I'd even do like the little screwing as almost like some sort of stim or ritual just to put on the mask, put on the helmet, put on the hazmat suit, put on all of that stuff so I could, make eye contact, appear empathetic, do all the right things. And it was really exhausting. And, having 2 degrees in social science is very expensive. So masking has been a burden. It has been just really hard. It has been something that's allowed me to work jobs in behavioral health, but at the cost of, so much stress. On the flip side, I am a huge fan of role playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. And role playing is a form of masking, but it's joyful. There are low stakes. This isn't going to cost my job. This might get my character in trouble, but that's okay. And I can mask as whoever I want to. It's no longer tied to me. It is a way of practicing it that honestly has been so the best practice for masking is just being a dungeon master and being 20 different non-player characters and doing all the voices and making eye contact a lot as, this weird cultist who always stares at people, or being really loud and gregarious as this, elf bard or whatever. By being able to do this in a way that's really safe, that has kind of taken away or alleviated some of the pain of masking, because all the times I have to put on this heavy iron mask of someone named Peter, I get to remember all the other times I get to wear all the fun, goofy masks where it doesn't matter if I screw it up at all. It just means I'm messing up playing D&D, and who cares? DMs mess up all the time.
Yeah. No, that's there's definitely a lot of important things there. I think my first takeaway is that, it was interesting that as a kid you spent a lot of time just like, watching others. And then later on you described one of your masks as like, a creepy cultist who just, stared at others. So, maybe not such a mask.
There's a bit of truth with every character you create.
Yeah, and that brings to mind like, authenticity. Like, are our masks like the authentic us, or do they have like a component of us that's authentic, and like, what does that do, what does that mean for our identity? Yeah.
There have been a lot of autistic people who question whether or not they're human, and it is such a fascinating conversation because I think human is defined as a neurotypical concept.
Yeah,
Mm,
human, normal, all that for sure.
I really find myself personally aligning with a lot of trees.
Or bugs.
Them too. Hives, really.
Awesome. Hives, good to know. So speaking of trees, Adam, what does masking mean to you?
I think masking for me, I would define it as the way in which the expectations of the baseline behaviors in civil society are hostile to my most self actualized embodiment. How I need to contort myself into something that is completely unnatural, almost sort of allegorically like a game of Twister, and still somehow pretend to be a comfortable human being and a joyous and positive human being in human spaces. And as a consequence of not really being able to do that fully effectively, dealing with a lot of unfair criticism, a lot of unfair ostracism, when people say, oh my gosh, he seemed uncomfortable. He seemed standoffish. He seemed disengaged. He didn't seem like he liked this. All of these things that a meritocratic capitalist society tries to ascribe to individual character, that are simply a reality of me needing to embody myself in ways that are not natural to my neurological reality, are not natural to my most comfortable type of embodiment. And there's a term because science loves syndromes, the disease model of investigation of mental health, and there's something called uncanny valley syndrome, which is the sense where if people don't quite believe that you are cosplaying a human being or what their experience is of a human being, you seem a little bit robotic to them and they judge you unfairly. They may be internally uncomfortable in a way that they might not even be aware of or be able to articulate, but they will ostracize you. They will, act on that discomfort behind your back or sometimes in front of your face in ways that definitely limit your employment opportunities, limit your success opportunities, limit your acceptance opportunities in society. And furthermore, I find that masking, unlike other axes of marginalization that might affect me, like skin color, there isn't a public conversation or public education or awareness that neurodiversity, that neurocosmopolitanism is even a thing, even a need. And so there's the extra layer of uh, not being able to have that experience acknowledged.
Yeah, and I think that like not having our experience acknowledged is such a key sort of like salient aspect of, the impacts of masking. And I think it's something that mirrors what a lot of other folks with like invisible disabilities have to go through, where like, our own experiences or identities are so often and easily invalidated, especially by those around us, who assume, we're exactly like them because they can't, tell otherwise. And then you bring up, the example of skin color. And like, I think, we're going to talk about this later, but like masking definitely means different things based on like who you are and how other people, perceive the identities that, they can see and their preconceived notions of their identities. And, I think your earlier comment about, God, what were you talking about? Just I forget what specifically you were saying. I think it was just something about our experiences with like society at large. It made me realize, like masking doesn't happen at all in a vacuum. It happens based on, the norms and beliefs and attitudes of like what exists as normal within your own society or within the people around you. And how is difference understood? Is it seen as a bad thing? Is it seen as a good thing? Is it seen as something that should be hidden? Yeah, there's so much nuance behind this for sure. Peter, you're doing the thumb thing
Yeah,
where you have or
yeah,
finger
yeah.
thing where you have something to say. Yeah.
There was something you were talking about with like um unmasking and that kind of being a and the uncanny valley. People who are masking will always exist in that uncanny valley, but I do a lot of work with autistic friendship and understanding how that occurs. And autistics don't make friends by masking, or if they do, they're very fragile friendships. The friendships that I've kind of helped facilitate that have been the most successful are the ones that are completely unmasked. Those are the ones that form very easily. Those are the ones that are super weird, super goofy, and super info dumping all the time, just zero neurotypical traits. Those are the friendships that last. Those are the friendships that are genuine, real autistic friendships. And I think, it's important to acknowledge, kind of as a system of oppression that autistics face, not having a model for friendship that works for them means they don't get a support network. They don't learn how to set appropriate boundaries and know what a friendship means. So you look at the amount of, autistics that get taken advantage of because they've never had a friend. So the first person to be nice to them who might be taking advantage of them can just, take them to the bank.
Yeah. I mean, I wish that were just a really far-fetched example, but I can definitely think of several times where I've heard of, like the bank situation like happening. And it's, yeah, true. Like, we know from research that, as autistic people, we don't get that dopamine rush that non-autistic people get when we're around, our favorite people. We just get it when we're doing our favorite things. And so, like in my own life, I had learned that I always have to put other people's needs above our own, both in like how I engage with them, how I do friendships. And, like you were saying, Peter, it just left me feeling really unfulfilled. And, probably why it's autistic people get victimized in so many different, spaces and, places, unfortunately. So yeah, um, so much more to be said about that. And so I think it leads in well to our next planned question, which is what happened in your life for you to have learned what masking is and how has masking impacted you? So Adam, you want to take this one first?
Sure. I headed full face into adulthood after a pretty difficult adolescence where I was selectively mute. It's called selective mutism. There's really nothing selective about it, but situationally mute for many years. In my home, I really didn't speak. I was a special ed kid. I took 5 years to finish high school, and not really being clear. And this is going back to like 2000 when I was 18 on what I know now about my neurology and my diagnoses. And I ended up through a lot of serendipity having a lot of opportunities in life, but ultimately ending up somewhere in my 30s where I was still basically kind of living hand to mouth, not really able to scale, not really able to value stack, not really able to ingratiate myself to these systems of acceptance that society had laid out. And, I eventually came to understand that a lot of my experience in with different organizations, different aspects of the entertainment industry were very grounded in just a certain systemic prejudice, a systemic lack of acceptance of autistic embodiment. And once I started to really educate myself about those things, I was able to kind of process a lot of situations. Realize, oh wait, okay, I am where I am in life, or perhaps I have not gotten to where I would like to be in life, very much as a consequence of struggling to find, first of all, struggling to even know what my own embodiment was. I always say, and to wrap it up, there's a huge talk about ABA and what, and I feel like I grew up with ABA before it was invented. I grew up with this sense of having my natural embodiment rejected, kind of pounded out of me in order to embody this ideal of the successful citizen, the successful participant in society. And a lot of my work as an adult, my cognitive behavioral work, my therapy work, is kind of recovering from that trauma and rediscovering, like, wait, what are my stems? What do I need to do to embody myself effectively and achieve my own maximum success?
Yeah, and that yeah, your questions about like what does success really mean, I think is a really important one. There's the neurotypical idea of what success means, and then there's the reality that like we as autistic people have to live in, that in a lot of cases just means we have to redefine success for ourselves. Otherwise, we're just gonna feel a lot of pain and grief that either our lives haven't gone as well as like other people's have, or just like we haven't been able to achieve the things we wanted to. And I think in some way, sort of like reframing our own embodiment is realizing like, yeah, like our experiences, our personhood is shaped by a lot of these barriers we go through. And it also means we're going to have to sort of like change our plan of what life is going to mean for us in the future. Yeah, so definitely really relating to a lot of what you said. So Talia, do you want to take this question next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I relate to a lot of what you said, Adam, about masking being shaped by trauma. For me, was a very I was a very quiet kid, and all the way until middle school, I did well in school. I didn't have any social trouble that was visible to the adults in my life. And right around when I was 11 or 12, I started having really severe school avoidant anxiety. Like I just couldn't go. And it was, this led to me being diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder and spending many, many years in treatment for anxiety, and essentially being told over and over that anxiety is irrational. It's in your head. It's not real. There's nothing to actually be anxious about. And I taught myself and was taught to just force myself into uncomfortable situations over and over and over, because you're supposed to go outside of your comfort zone. And the best way to beat anxiety is to just do the thing. And it never really made sense to me, because I never really felt like anxiety actually kind of described what I was going through, or what my brain was experiencing when I would have to attend middle school, for example. Um, and so I remember being 11 or 12 years old and having these social settings where one moment I would be having just an absolute meltdown, unable to function, begging, pleading to not be made to leave the house. And the next second, I was forced into the social situation, whatever it was, and I was fine. I was masking at such a high level that it looked like nothing had been going on and nobody could tell that there was an issue because I was pretending everything was fine. And then the moment I was alone, I was having just the most debilitating meltdowns. And so for most of my adolescence and young adulthood, I just kind of thought I was crazy because anxiety, I knew I was anxious, but it didn't seem like my anxiety functioned in the same way that everybody else's anxiety functioned. And so I left home when I was 17, so mid-pandemic. I'm the Gen Z on the panel, and I have spent the last couple of years starting to rediscover what those triggers are, and going off of really intense medication for anxiety and for like just a lot of drugs, and starting to figure out how my brain actually works and what is triggering for me. And it's only been through that kind of self-discovery process that I've been able to figure out that I'm not just anxious. There are specific things that make me anxious because I'm autistic, and there are specific triggers that are really difficult for me to deal with. So that has led to me kind of starting to understand what masking actually is. I recently read Unmasking Autism, and for those of you who haven't read it, that was a really positive experience for my own self-discovery, and that was actually what encouraged me to go attend my first Square Pegs meeting. Um, and so I am just now starting to get to a place of being able to actually analyze and try to understand what parts of myself are masked and what parts of myself are me. Kelly, I think you said in the chat here, it's very difficult to tell what parts of yourself are masked and what parts of yourself are organic when you've been doing it for so long at such a high level that it's become part of who you are. Um, so for me, what a lot of what that has looked like is realizing that I become unbelievably tense in certain situations because I'm forcing myself not to stim, because I have a lot of full body stims that are very kind of alarming to see. I've been told that I look like I'm having a seizure when I shake my whole body for like a couple of minutes at a time. So I just stopped doing it in public at a very young age. I just trained myself, you can chew your fingernails until they bleed, but don't do anything else that might be out of the ordinary because people will think you're weird. And that has taken a toll on my body. The amount of tension that comes with spending 8 hours talking to people and not letting yourself feel that in your body and just acting. So for me, yeah, that's a lot of what that unmasking or the beginning of unmasking has looked like, is trying to realize when it feels like I'm acting, when my face feels sore from making an expression that it doesn't want to be making, that I put on my face subconsciously, like a very literal mask, which I think is a great example of where the term comes from. Yeah, I see Heather saying that you look like you've been possessed. I've been told that I look like I'm insane because my eye contact is so intense when I'm smiling politely. So it's really just been a journey of just starting to realize when those moments are not coming from your conscious brain, but there's something that you're forcing yourself to do so that you don't end up being in an emotionally or physically dangerous situation.
Yeah, I mean, it really does seem to come down to safety. Like ultimately, that's something you said earlier, whether it be having to deal with like the social sanctions of like existing in the school as an autistic person and coming across as autistic, or just hiding our discomfort in circumstances where like we have to do so in order to just like get our basic needs met. And since in a lot of ways it's an invisible experience, I guess, unless we're stimming like demons or something like that, then I've seen so many circumstances where folks will just assume like, yeah, we're just making all of this up for attention, just attention seeking behaviors. And usually I've noticed like a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, is sent right after that. And so it's just like, we're traumatized by masking, and then our own trauma is pathologized onto just another diagnosis that in a lot of cases just brings more trauma and doesn't necessarily help us. In most cases I've seen it's used. Yeah, well, definitely appreciate everything you had to say there for sure. Let's see, I think Peter, you haven't answered this question yet, right?
Yeah, so I kind of have a similar situation where I had an ADHD diagnosis, which was primarily inattentive, which, fun fact, when you're dealing with a lot of sensory dysregulation, it's hard to pay attention to things. So that wasn't a very useful diagnosis, nor was the heavy amounts of medication. But, you know, fun fact, when you have black and white thinking, you can really make a bunch of complex flowcharts to explain why you actually really do have ADHD until someone finally says, Peter, please get assessed for autism. And then I did, and I was. And then everything started making sense. And I realized why I was exhausted all the time and
And
why I
here
was
all of
just,
us were just assuming you knew the entire time.
yeah, I know.
Guess we were
I
wrong.
really did not. And it was there were so many signs. Like I got along so well with all the autistics I worked with and just would get them in ways that nobody else would. But I still maintain that sort of masking, even though the autistics could kind of get on the same wavelength and 100% pick up on it. Um, but once I had that, I suddenly had a context for the exhaustion. And I also read that book, Unmasking Autism, and really started thinking about like what are some of the ways where I am masking and where can I start taking the mask off? And I was promptly punished for it. I brought it up with my supervisor and said, "Hey, I'm autistic. Can I have some accommodations?" And her response was literally to laugh and say, "Yeah, that's not how we do things here." And this was a behavioral health agency. That worked with a lot of autistics, and to more or less be laughed at by my supervisor, that was just a very clear message that like, no, you mask or you don't fit in. And so I decided to leave that agency and I started working for the ARC, and thankfully I can unmask quite a bit because I work with Zach, and we both unmask a lot together, and it's great.
And you get to
And
talk about
that
bugs whenever you want, and we don't make fun of
no,
you for it.
I know. It's great. It feels a little weird. Um, but having that sense of like liberation, there is both a sense of joy, but also deep rooted sorrow at this child who was punished time and time and time and time again and ended up, working so well with autistics because somewhere deep inside me there was sympathy for them because I wanted them to have an adult that got them in the way that I never got. Um, and I love working with autistic kids. I now let them know I'm autistic. And one of the best compliments I ever got was an autistic teenager saying, "You are the most reasonable adult I know." And it was very nice. But then I realized there must be so many unreasonable adults in this child's life, and we just need to change that.
Yeah, we do. And I think a lot of it comes down to the importance of, panels like this, really sharing what the actual experiences are and really starting to push back against the narrative for sure. So, yeah, again, I'm just appreciative that y'all are here, baring your souls and sharing your stories and experiences. And it seems like, they really resonate with like what folks are typing about in chat for sure as well. Let's see. I forget. Adam, did you answer this question already?
I think I did.
Okay, cool. That's you get questions like that when you have a dude with ADHD, steering the boat. We might crash it once or twice. So the next question is, and I think it's a really important one and one I've seen a lot of discussion about. Masking most commonly seems to be used to describe the experiences of like autistic or like neurodivergent people. But are there other aspects of your like identities that you feel like impact, your masking, or where you feel like maybe you're doing a, same or like similar type of masking on top of the masking? So where you're like wearing 2 or 3 masks instead of just the one mask, like what's that been like? Yeah, Talia, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, absolutely. I have many things to say about this. It's kind of a multifaceted question. So I think for me, there are parts of that that are related to identity, and then there are other parts of that that are related to comorbidities, which I had seen someone mention in the chat a few minutes ago. But to tackle the aspect that has to do with identity first, I feel like there are a lot of forms of masking that are taught as a way to protect yourself in the same way that it is true for neurodiverse people. I think it's also true for a lot of other minority groups. As a queer person, as a Jew, I was taught, growing up Jewish, I was taught quite a bit like there are certain situations when you should hide your Star of David. There are certain situations when you should not use your full name if you have a very Jewish sounding name like I do. You should not mention your religion because you never know who's going to become hostile or unsafe. And that, along with being taught not to hold your queer partner's hand under certain circumstances, there are a lot of things that have to do with surface level masking that are taught. So those, I think, are similar in the idea of hiding an aspect of yourself for your safety, but very different in the sense that they are conscious. You are choosing to put a shirt over your Star of David so that nobody knows, rather than subconsciously going into a space and acting in a way that just isn't really reflective of who you are because it feels like the only way to safely navigate that space, which for me is where gender comes in. Because I mean, I'm non binary, but as someone who is socialized as a woman and is socialized as a woman in a lot of settings, you have to act a certain way or you will be seen as threatening. And that absolutely ties into the autism. I do not have a very expressive face under a lot of circumstances. And so growing up, I was like, oh, it's just sexism when I got told that I looked angry all the time. Or, oh, it's just sexism when I was cut off for talking for more than 3 sentences at a time. I was like, well, that's because,
Talia, do you know you've been talking for more than 3 sentences at a time?
oh boy. Yeah, I mean, I think it's you learn to navigate it in a way that makes sense. So when your mother and your sister and everybody in your life is telling you, oh, that's just what happens when you're a girl, men talk over you, men, treat you like you're angry or hostile or aggressive. And I'm sure that's especially true for women of color. Like you're saying, Kelly, like you you tell yourself that it's not related to anything else and that it's just kind of a part of the social hierarchy, which definitely leads to masking just to fit in. Um, but the other part of that has to do with comorbidities, I think, has to do with a lot of the other mental health issues that can go hand in hand with autism. So for me, I spent a lot of years struggling with an eating disorder. And in relation to trying to fit in to a very gendered category, trying to behave like the girls in my peer group and to model the behaviors that were being exemplified, I ended up in a group of friends where everyone was struggling with a very severe eating disorder. And it's only in adulthood that I'm able to realize that not only did that make it worse for everyone, just as a blanket level, everybody's triggering each other type of way, but also I was modeling people's behaviors to try to be better at being anorexic, which is a very, very bad pattern to get into when you're modeling people's self-destructive and hurtful behaviors as a way to fit in, but you're ultimately just causing a lot of intense harm for yourself. I think that is very common with a number of comorbidities. That's one that I've experienced, but I've heard a lot of other people talk about that in regards to just I don't know, violent tendencies, self-harm behaviors, just a lot of things that you model due to other aspects of your identity because it's been taught to you that ultimately are really, really dangerous and really hurtful. So, yeah, I think when it comes to identity, there are different aspects that impact things, but for me, gender has been the biggest one, especially being undiagnosed. Like, I'm very hesitant to even pursue a professional diagnosis because I'm aware of how much sexism and medical misogyny is in that field and how commonly people are misdiagnosed with things. I've had multiple people tell me that I probably just have borderline in the last month since I started to like confide in a few people, hey, I'm actually autistic. I'm just now starting to realize. Or even going back to those comorbidities in childhood, and I didn't know this as a kid. I actually found this out as an adult that I was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, which, first of all, I feel like they should tell you if you get diagnosed with something, even if you are 13. But it was just an interesting example of like me modeling behaviors that didn't fit the traditional mold of what female behavior is supposed to look like. And upon doing further research into that particular diagnosis and label, it looks like it's most commonly applied to young boys of color who are on the spectrum, who are seen as being disruptive when they're modeling the same behavior that in a little white boy would be seen as autism. And so I think it stands to reason that that's one of those comorbidities that is often assigned to people who don't fit that traditional mold of what autism looks like. So, anyways, I might have gotten a bit off track there, but those are my
No,
thoughts.
I think that was all really, really great and important. And I think, yes, so many salient points there, especially, talking about, sometimes like masking is a very conscious effort, like, hiding the Star of David or like, not, holding the hands, with your partner if you're in like Idaho or somewhere like that. And then also looking at, yeah, just like what are the long-term impact of like having to go through those experiences and yeah, then, what we were talking about earlier, just getting their trauma reactions pathologized as a result for sure. Yeah, and I think, it just comes down to the idea that like there's certain expectations of how like, quote unquote women should behave, men, should behave. And whenever there's like those deviations, then, that's when it really becomes like unsafe for us. And then we have to, go into the whole masking thing. And so yeah, definitely feels like a lose-lose situation for sure. Adam, what are your thoughts on this question?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm biracial and I grew up in a family that denied the existence of race. My mom is black, my dad is white. Wonderful people, as much as they can be. But I think they tried to create a post-racial identity or archetype for a family, and certainly within their own love, trying to achieve an equality. We really did not speak of race as an axis of oppression or as a social hurdle. And I think that became problematic for me. I'm again, someone who also in adolescence, up until about the age of 11, 12, I would probably externally present as relatively high functioning, maybe a little bit quirky, but adolescence, once my race became very, very salient for society, that created a lot of difficulties. Partly because my dad being white, and who's probably also undiagnosed autistic, was able to find a lot of success in doing things in life and embodying that naturally in ways that were accepted that I'm not going to be accepted in those same ways because I'm not white. And so that kind of, I didn't really realize until my late 30s, I'm 40 now, that, oh, the way that both of my parents tried to model for me to be a successful person, basically win the game of life, is not something that really applies to me because I'm autistic. And, I further kind of realized that just, I suppose, the process of elimination as I grew older, seeing so many friends who were, marginalized in different ways, many friends of color starting from nothing and growing to very high levels of success, more or less in similar career paths to my own. And then realizing, wait, this can't all be about racial marginalization. This can't all be about, I'm short, I'm 5'8", so people make more money for every inch of height. There are all these types of different oppressions that we can break down demographically. And I started to realize that being autistic was probably the most salient experience of marginalization in terms of my own life journey. And that while there are other aspects, I think one term that arises when you're Black is code switching, the need to quote unquote code switch in a situation, depending on who surrounds you. But I think the difference between code switching and masking is that at least there is a social discourse, a deeply imperfect social discourse around white privilege, around race, around the historicity of that, and some acknowledgement of that being an axis of oppression. Whereas, again, as I mentioned earlier, being autistic, there's not really a way to even begin the conversation when you tell someone that you're autistic, like that you don't really know what they are thinking of in terms of the archetype or what that means in their understanding, because there's just such a lack of education on that topic. So,
Interesting. So it sounds like, in like how you see the differences between code switching and masking, it's mostly on, you know, other people's experience when it comes to conversations about like autism or disability, and not necessarily about like the mechanics of how you perform it. Am I accurate there, or am I missing something?
not just other people's conversations, but there is not a policy response. There are policy responses to try to engage topics like racial discrimination, uh, you know, uh, sexism, misogyny, homophobia, et cetera. At least there is a policy conversation of, hey, how can we structure a workplace? How can we structure, whether it's from a human resources perspective, from a legal perspective, ways to at least try to move the needle a little bit closer to inclusivity on these matters, whereas there's just really not that type of conversation with regard to neurodiversity.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely yeah, that's thought provoking. And, as a social worker, I always love to be reminded about just how the macro has a big impact on the micro and our own present situations. And yeah, I definitely agree. There does need to be like, more understanding, which hopefully leads to like the more policy responses, which maybe eventually will lead to, better lives for us. And we won't hear so many stories of like how autistic people were just fired for disclosing that they're autistic, like 3 or 4 people have in chat today. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
definitely.
also to say that, because I had a lot of experience in the entertainment industry for a period of my life, and which is an extremely eugenic, just kind of nakedly judgmental industry when you are in Hollywood, and especially the notion of the cattle call audition, that you can call in 100 or 1,000 people and find the perfect human paintbrush to cast to live a story or live an embodiment. Not only were there basically no stories being told about a life experience that reflected mine, but even in that cattle call process, you can name gender discrimination, you can name body type discrimination, you can name racial discrimination, but I experienced just a lot of discrimination related to being autistic and how I naturally embodied my best self. And there isn't really even any conversation about that in conversations about inclusivity or diversity or a need for representation in decisive organizations like the Casting Society of America, the major unions. That whole industry is still very much in this type of eugenic cattle call uh, uh, morphology. So.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I'm not surprised. I've heard similar things from a few other like autistic or neurodivergent folks trying to make it in the industry. And so yeah, definitely something that needs to change for sure. Peter, do you want to take this one next?
Yeah, Adam, something that Zach and I work on, and I've also been working on the side, is doing a lot of talks about that specific topic. And I'm doing a lot of work on the side on instructing professional organizations about thinking about understanding how neurodivergents communicate, why it's healthier for us to be able to unmask, and how to support us when we're doing it. Thus far, I'm not talking with any entertainment agencies, but if you want to get me in touch, I've got some really good stuff to say on that. But I actually want to, talk about all this. So I came out as bisexual around the same time as I was diagnosed as autistic. And, I had known for a long time, but I hadn't really internalized it. But I kind of did that about the same time. And what was really interesting was suddenly I went from the straight box, which never felt right for me, into the gay box. Like there wasn't really a bisexual box. There was straight in the gay box, which was like, okay, this is cool. I like some of that. It was also really, really overwhelming. And I was finding that I actually needed to mask more because I was at a real kind of normalized level of masking as someone who was in the straight box. But going into the gay box where suddenly it's a lot of, people being very, forthcoming and forward about things and having an expectation of having this sort of type of social life, all this stuff was really, really like, oh my God, this feels a bit better than the straight box, but it's still not the right box. Until I sat down with a neurodivergent affirming queer therapist who's a good friend of mine, and we spent like 5 hours just unpacking gay culture. And he knew I was autistic, and I was just like, okay, why is this way? What does this mean? And by completely unmasking and just saying I don't get any of this, and him getting me and understanding me and just being able to break it down, it allowed me to suddenly have a lot of contextualization that made it a lot easier for me to reintegrate with the queer community in a way where I understood it and I got it. And so instead of, masking impacting it, unmasking enabled it. And I think that, masking impacts a lot of identities, but kind of being able to unmask and find people who get it, get the sacredness of unmasking to help you understand other parts of your identity and culture, because it's like you're going into one box to another box and they're never quite the right shape, and being able to get out of that shape and kind of be yourself is it's so friggin' helpful, because I was like, this doesn't feel like the right box for me until all that stuff got explained by someone who I was unmasking to. And then it's like, okay, all this makes perfect sense.
Interesting. Yeah, that definitely sounds like there's a lot of really like nuanced and dynamic experiences there for sure. And, just really speaks to the importance of like self-discovery and like authenticity of like your own identities, just to really, I mean, A, understand yourself better, and then like B, really understand more about like what are your actual needs, whether that be, related to your own like sexuality, to like human connection, or just to even like, what kinds of accommodations or supports do you need as an autistic person? So
Great.
yeah.
Great.
Hold on. All right. And yeah, I forget where I was going with that. But I'm sure the thought will return to me in a moment. So, the next, and before I ask this next question, I just wanted to say, A, thank you all for being here. B, if you have a chance, please fill out the survey I'm attaching in the chat box, just so A, King County knows that we're actually doing these webinars, and B, just so we can make sure that our next webinars are more accessible. So our next question is one that comes out of a lot of discussion I've been seeing online within the autistic community and within the parent community about whether or not masking is a privilege or not, or if it's multiple things at the same time. So Peter, are you wanting to take this one first?
So it's it's a really tough one because if you are in a place where you don't have to mask and you can get by fine, if you're surrounded by friends and family that get you as you are, you have a job, you have housing, you have everything you need, then yes, the ability to unmask is a privilege. Um, if you have lost your job, lost your housing, yada yada yada, the inability to mask is like not a privilege, and people who can mask are have privilege over you. And I think ultimately there's the dream of being supported whether you're masking or not, you know, to self-determine what level of whatever you want to do, and to be free to unmask without endangering your employment, without endangering your housing, without endangering all the Maslow's hierarchy things. But the reality that many of us are facing is, we have to mask for our jobs, we have to mask to maintain our housing, we have to mask to do all these things. And it's kind of like, I was thinking about like an analogy for this last night, and it's like, okay, so what one group of people gets to get punched in the gut 5 times, and they but they get to go inside out of the rain. Another group of people gets to be punched in the gut 4 times, but they're or 6 times or however many times, but they're still out in the rain. In the end, both groups of people are getting punched in the gut. And by pointing fingers at each other saying, "Oh, you got punched slightly less than I did," or "You get to do this." In the end, I think we need to be really focusing on the fact that this is not something that we're choosing to self-determine, and I think it should be. We should have the right to choose whether or not we want to mask without endangering our livelihoods and our Maslow's hierarchy stuff. That should be our self-determination, because I know that sometimes I do want to mask. Sometimes I'm in a group with a bunch of neurotypicals, and it's kind of like how I won't talk about being bi when I'm hanging out with my boomer relatives. Um, it's and I want to be able to do that safely.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, it really sounds like that safety is just like at the key of pretty much all of this conversation for sure. Talia, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that I agree a lot with what Peter is saying. To me, it is both in the most simple answer possible. It is a result of oppression that masking is necessary, and that we've built a world in which it's very very difficult to be your authentic self in public, in the workspace, for many in the home space as well, in social settings. That is absolutely a result of oppression, but the ability to mask, as much as it can be very detrimental and very traumatic, the ability to pull off masking enough to be able to hold down a job, to be able to get savings, to be able to access medical care on your own, to be able to just navigate the world without, I'm not going to say without additional support, but without so much additional support that it makes it difficult to function on your own. Like, that very much is a privilege. My most recent job took it out of me, and I'm in a period of like intense burnout. But the fact that I was able to get the job and work the job for however long and make money and be able to support myself is still a privilege that a lot of people don't have. As much as that necessity to burn yourself out and to act in a way that isn't organic to who you are is hurtful, it's still something that many people don't have the ability to do or the access to do. And that definitely, is a form of privilege, tied to financial freedom, at least in my case. And I think that a lot of that is just kind of a direct result of the systems of oppression that are tied to capitalism, the need for productivity in a way that makes money, because every autistic person I know is incredibly productive when it comes to their special interests. They are able to do some really amazing, incredible things. And I would not I would never demean the value of those wonderful skills. But unfortunately, the capitalist society does demean the value of those skills, because if something isn't productive in a way that can be monetized, it is seen as less valuable, which is why the necessity to mask to be able to hold down a very neurotypical centered job. My most recent job was as a barista. That is so much harder than being able to perform at an incredibly high level and to be incredibly good at something that you might have as a special interest. It's just it's fundamentally incompatible with the need for financial productivity. And that is, I think, where the oppression ties in.
For sure. So yeah, definitely a nuanced experience, for sure. But yeah, all really tied to the roots of oppression. Yeah, that makes sense. Adam, what do you think?
Ooh. Um, I think that this is just the topic of embodiment or the need to mask. That's where I would almost want to take the conversation larger than just a conversation about autism, because I grew up in a world where if you were not black, if you were white and had white Christian able-bodied property class, etc., if you looked like Kurt Cobain. You could be wild and out there in your embodiment, and it would just be dismissed as like, oh, that's just like rebel without a cause. That's just like that's almost endearing. That's just a phase. That's just, oh, they're just going through that, or that's safe. It wasn't dangerous. Whereas if you were basically wild and out with the same type of embodiment in, say, the way like a Tupac Shakur, then like, oh my gosh, that's dangerous. That's hide your kids, hide your wives, hide your families. That's a very dangerous thing. And there's Michelle Obama, remarked about this about black embodiment that the bar keeps getting higher and higher, even if when you happen to present as black, in terms of not being able to embody yourself in imperfect ways, in elegant ways, and. That's definitely part of my own experience and frankly confusion growing up as somebody who wanted to find a way to embody myself and find exemplars of embodiment. But, this gets into conversations about just topics like safety and embodiment and police misconduct. And we're like, okay, it's not safe if you are black in society in a lot of places to embody yourself as freely and as openly as somebody who is not. It dovetails with sexuality. I've been openly questioning for many many years, and people always just kind of dismiss that. Oh, you're not really GLBTQ. The Q is like you just don't want to come out as something specific. It's like, well, no, I'm questioning. And I do not feel incomplete. I don't feel like I'm in a phase. I don't feel like I'm questioning and on my way to a different, more complete type of sexual embodiment. I am questioning. I really don't know what's going to happen. There's a cognitive dissonance between my imagined sexual interest and when I actually get into a situation with a human body. How am I going to react to the touch and all of the different complex sensory experiences that dynamic? I feel very complete with the identity of being questioning, but again, that's not a type of embodiment that is really salient in the way that that any group wants to talk about sexuality, whether it's the GLBTQ community or the religious conservative community or what have you. That you don't have that being a thing. So, yeah, there's lots of complex threads.
Yeah, there is. And, I wish we had, more than one webinar to really be able to start to untangle those webs. It is a really salient and open conversation, and one I've seen, take many forms, in all of the Facebook, Reddit, TikTok groups and all that. I'll just jump in with my own thoughts on here too. Like on the one hand, like I was out with a non-speaking autistic friend about a month or two ago, and the waitress, upon seeing that he, had to type to communicate, asked me and the other, speaking autistic person present, if he'd like a kids menu. The non-speaker would like a kids menu. Like one, like WTF, and two, like, my friend later said like he wished he could, go to spaces and not always have to have supporters around him, or like not always have to deal with comments like that. And then like on the other hand, like I'm working within like, research collaboration that's looking at like the causes for like suicidal ideation in autistic adults, and what we've found and what like similar studies have found is like masking is the biggest predictor for suicidal ideation in autistic adults. And so it's like, what Talia was saying, we essentially just like have to burn ourselves out in order to, survive out there. And, if we're good at masking, we're just rewarded with harder circumstances to mask in. And, similar to what I think you were saying as well, Adam, the bar just keeps getting raised higher. And, like ultimately, like I do think we do have an advantage in masking, but like whenever like I see folks online say like masking is a privilege, like ultimately I don't think it is, because it is entangled in like the webs of oppression, and like we shouldn't have to, just be seen as like more relatable to the non-autistic people around us to be able to get those advantages. Like they should be, available to like all sorts of folks with disabilities, and not just the ones who seem least disabled. And I also recognize we're having this conversation with, for autistic people who are, capable of masking in many different forms. And I wish, maybe next time we can have more folks who, who, do have experience, who can't mask, and would love to hear what they think on it. So let's jump to the final question really quickly. If you decided to reduce the amount of masking you've been doing in your life, how did you go about it, and did it help? Peter, you want to take this first?
Yeah. So when I got my autism diagnosis, I realized, I spent a lot of time having these long kind of conversations with myself about what is masking, what is who I want to be, and where can I actually expose. I I don't want to say deficit, but lack of understanding. Where can I say I don't get this. I need this, and asking for accommodation, and that's very, there's so much guilt associated with it and so much internalized crap. But in the end, it ended up really helping my marriage because, for the first time in 11 years, I was able to come up with words to explain, here's why I couldn't do this. I need these things written down like this. You see that I tried and I screwed up because I can't understand instructions when they look like this. I need them written like this, and then I will go and do this. Instead of it being a fight, it was suddenly very clear communication, and it's made things so nice because suddenly, because I can unmask and I can say, this is what I need. This is how I work. This is how I show affection. This is how I'm happy. This is how I need space. This is me saying I need space. Um, you know, Being able to be aware that, hey, all these things that I've never had words for, I now have language for. That has made me be able to be my true self to the person who is the most important to me in the world. And that unmasking has just been amazing. And I can also see situations where, if my spouse were a terrible person, it would have ended our marriage. But no, it made it wonderful. And, it made it so I am seen for who I am. And there's now language for what's going on. And there's so fewer issues because we get each other now. And so that's been just fantastic.
That's good. So it really helped develop a more like authentic relationship. Um, yeah, I think that's important. And Sam's comment in chat about letting go of the shame, asking for help, and catering to the personal needs. I'm honestly surprised, like, we haven't talked about the shame yet, like, because that I think I mean, I guess we've talked about it somewhat, but it seems to be a really like prevalent reason as to like why we mask for sure. And it does prevent those authentic relationships and that support from forming. So for sure.
Well,
Um,
it's one of those things where, it really helped my marriage, but it lost me a job that I was, deeply invested in. So,
mhm,
it feels like unmasking is a roll of the dice.
mhm.
If someone's a good person, they're gonna get it. If someone is just, not interested in really understanding you, they won't, and that will cost it the friendship. But I think it's was that friendship, was that job, was that whatever worth it in the first place?
Right.
And frankly, that job that I left, no, it wasn't worth it. In retrospect, it was abusive. I'm much
Mhm.
happier here.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Thank you. Talia, what do you think? Oh, you're muted. So whatever you're saying is great. I just can't hear it.
All I said was yeah. But I think that for me, the process of unmasking is really new. Doing this panel, for example, is a step towards starting to unmask more, and just be more open and talking about my experiences. And so I'm really at the beginning of that journey of just trying to be able to notice when I am masking, is the first step towards being able to unmask in certain settings. And so for me, that looks like listening to my body's cues a lot more than I have trained myself not to do, which can be really hard because if you ignore your body enough, it gets very easy to mask for an extended period of time if you just ignore all of the physical pain that it puts you in. But just trying to notice when my muscles are like extremely tense, or to notice when I'm starting to feel super nauseous, and to actually like get myself out of overstimulating situations rather than just force myself to endure them so that I'm not, you know, the odd one out. Which is a really hard process when a lot of your life you've been told that the issue is anxiety and that you should continue to do the thing that makes you feel really bad. I am starting to let myself not do things and accept that I have limitations and do things in a different way that is more accessible to me rather than just forcing myself to do them in the same way as everyone else. Um, One thing that is a really prevalent part of my masking in particular is my speech patterns and my facial habits. So over the last 6 months or so, I've been going through a vocal injury actually to my throat muscles. And I'm starting to realize how heavily tied to masking that has been, to speaking in a voice that is like an octave and a half higher than my natural cadence in order to seem more friendly. Um, that has ultimately caused a lot of pain and difficulty for me, and also doesn't help me express myself at all because this is what my voice sounds like. um, so it's just been a process of starting to notice when I am doing something that is tied to masking, and asking myself if I need to be doing it. And sometimes the answer is yes, because masking is absolutely a form of self-protection, and there are times when I can't do a full body stim in a tiny cramped booth in a restaurant. But there are other times when I can go for a walk and take some deep breaths because I notice that I'm getting to a point of overstimulation because of the level of masking that I'm forcing myself to do. So for me, that first step is just listening to my cues before I can do anything larger, any more like fundamental changes to my life, or like being closer to being able to articulate how masking impacts me to the other people in my life. Those are next steps further down the line, because this is very new for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a lifelong experience for sure. And it's also one that's all the more scary when you're just starting at the foot of the mountain and you don't see how high up it is for sure. Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. Adam, what are your thoughts on this?
Ooh, I've lived a very disembodied life, uh, where to an extent where I would even, there's so many co-diagnoses. Uh, Depersonalization, derealization disorder is one of them, where you are so ingratiated and accustomed to your disembodied masking, uh, that you can almost forget who you are and not realize that you're not being embodied, not even know what the horizon is that you should head for, if you wish to be more embodied or if you wish to unmask. And so I've spent many, many years, if not decades, of my life in that regard. And then, speaking, to what you were speaking to, Peter, the sense of just finding acceptance and not really being able to explain to another person, hey, I don't know if I can do that on that day or if I can do that in that window. I don't know if I'll be verbal in that hour. I don't know if I'll be able to perform as you would expect me to perform just because you saw me in another context where I was having a high functioning day the other day. I don't know if that's going to be reproduced the next time that we encounter each other, and just all of the aspersions and lack of understanding that results in that. There's another condition called pathological demand avoidance. That I sometimes fall into, which is just the really being averse to commitments of dates and times and anything that requires me to be in a particular type of performance in a particular on a schedule, because a lot of my sensory experience has not been predictable. I don't know when I will be overloaded from having to mask. I don't know when I'll be nonverbal, which I have been for in many moments of my life, even as an adult. Uh, and those are definitely aspects. I think that as I've gotten older, um, it's weird because I'm 40 now, but I still feel like I feel young, because as I continue to explore the deliberateness with which I can drop my mask, even when I'm alone, because that's been a huge issue with me, that even when I'm alone, I have been so indoctrinated about the way that it is safe for me to embody myself in other contexts, that even dropping it when I'm by myself has been an ongoing challenge, an ongoing struggle that I'm continuing to learn about. Part of the issue I have with psychiatric medications is that, and I've been through, probably almost a dozen at this point, is that a lot of them will help me to mask more effectively. They will help me to present in a more neurotypical way, or you show a little bit less anxiety in an allistic situation that's a non-autistic social situation. But then I'm like, well, wait, do I want to be taking medication that helps me to mask more effectively, even if it does help me to to hold on to jobs, to make more money, to be more presentable, to win the allistic Olympics, is what I call them, as society is structured. And is that as optimal as just not leaning into that and finding ways to have self-actualization and hopefully finding success or a way to provide for myself and not be homeless, not be destitute, with my true embodiment and not masking. And so all of those are concerns that are extremely unresolved in a period of my life that is called midlife, colloquially, where the only thing I feel in the middle of right now is confusion. So,
Yep, it's just confusion all the way up, isn't it? Although the confusion does get easier as time goes on, um, at least in my experience, but who knows if it's the same for everyone else. Um, so Yeah, that was all of the questions we had planned to answer. I have been copying all of the audience questions we've been getting, and we have about 5 or so minutes left. So I think we should just jump into some of them. So a question we got earlier, I think it was from Hope, was do the aspects of autism get worse or more pronounced as we get older, or does that have to do with masking fatigue? Any thoughts on this?
You know, the thing that I've experienced is looking back, when I got my diagnosis, I suddenly really started looking at a bunch of different parts of my life and specific times where I was dealing with a lot of sensory overload or social difficulties and whatnot. And what I realized was it's not partnered with aging, it's partnered with context. So I'm experiencing a lot more autistic overload when I'm working a really demanding job and I'm, dealing with people 8 hours a day. And then, 5 years later, I've got a job where I'm working from home. And suddenly, I rarely deal with any sort of sensory overload. So, just looking at patterns of my life, I've realized that a lot of the symptoms that I ascribed with as being, autistic were pertaining to being overloaded or pertaining to being really uncomfortable. Um, there are also times where I've unmasked around other autistics, and there have been plenty of autistic traits, but they don't feel autistic. They just feel like me. And I don't want to pathologize that. It's like, yeah, this is me, going for a jog with someone, and literally the first thing I say is, "So I've been thinking about that article you sent me about neutrino physics," and then a 2-hour run, and it is nothing but neutrino physics. Is that autistic? Yes. Would I want to call that autistic? No, I just call it fun.
Unless we're talking about trains, and then in which case it probably is just autistic.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Talia, Adam, any thoughts?
I don't know how qualified I am to answer one about symptoms as we age.
You're more qualified than the average autism expert, so take it ahead.
I have found that having the freedom of adulthood to put myself in situations that I want to be in is great. I mean, I'm 19. Until very recently, you have such a lack of autonomy as a kid that it's very hard to figure out what is your own symptoms and what is just kind of like the normal aspects of existing as a human being. Um, and so for me, the last couple of years of being able to control what I do and where I go has been very positive. But overall, as far as how those symptoms might change throughout adulthood and the rest of my life, I couldn't say.
Sure, that's definitely valid. Yeah, and I think, the way I see it, it's very similar to, I think the way I see it is similar to what Peter said. Like it's all just based on the context we find ourselves in. And like most of us are just going to be working really demanding jobs for, so long that we might see more autistic just because we have less energy to mask because we have to prioritize our own survival needs. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions we should answer. Take this one really quickly. I'm not sure when I'm masking and what is truly me, my nature, since I've been keeping safe through life. How do y'all know? How do y'all know what's actually you and what's the mask, or if there's even a distinction, or if it's a different distinction?
Does it hurt?
Mm,
That's the most obvious indicator of whether or not I'm masking is this, there could be lots of kind of gray areas, but usually there is, I liken it to if you're playing one of those video games and you go into a radioactive area and you see like the little toxin icon increasing, if you kind of feel that like radioactive or toxic, level increasing, that's usually a pretty good indicator. And, having a job where I was working in crisis and doing a lot of crisis de-escalation, I got very, very much aware of that. And very much aware of like when the meter was getting really high. And the interesting thing is that actually made me really good at doing crisis because I could realize, okay, I need to step back because I'm getting overwhelmed. Whereas a lot of other people would stay in a situation for too long. In fact, I was amazing at crisis de-escalation because I was autistic, which doesn't seem like it makes sense, but for me it does.
There's a lot of us
But
in that field. I'll interrupt really quickly so Talia
yeah,
can have a
but
chance to go.
yeah, I have another meeting. So thank you,
Okay,
wonderful panel.
thank you, Peter.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a definitive way to answer that question. I think it's a question that I ask myself like 50 times a day. Is this my brain or is this my brain trying to mask? And sometimes I'm able to come up with an answer because I can try to feel the sensations in my body. I feel myself thinking about something and getting physically anxious, or I feel myself tensing up in a certain situation, or I feel myself just acting in a way that confuses me when I think about it, going, why did I say that? That doesn't accurately communicate what I was thinking. It just seemed like the right way to answer the question at the time. So for me, I am overthinking it all of the time. It's like a constant question in my head of, is this a real thought? Or is this something that I'm telling myself to think? And I wish I had a more definitive way to figure out how how to make that work. But as of right now in my life, I'm just kind of trying to listen to those cues when I do feel them. And I think that it's going to be a very long process of actually being able to figure out easily and independently what parts of myself or what parts of my behavior are masked. Um, I think it's going to be a long journey. I think it's just a lot of self reflection that can be very triggering at times when you're thinking about and overthinking past experiences that might have been traumatic to try to figure out where your self-preservation instincts were just kind of melding with your ability to mask, and warping your sense of self in the long run. It's a confusing and pretty hard process. I don't know that I would say that I feel physical pain all of the time when I'm masking, but I've heard that from some people that is true. I think for me is often more just a psychological weight of feeling like something is a lot harder than it should be, or a lot harder than it seems to be for others. And listening to those instincts, because one thing that I was taught was definitely that, it's always going to seem like everybody else is having an easier time than you. That's being human. But when you're autistic and you're in a room full of Aulistics, sometimes things actually are harder for you, and you're not just overthinking it. So just starting to listen to those cues.
Yeah, I think I think that's critical. I'll definitely echo what you and Peter said. Like, does it hurt? And then I would add to that, do you know if it hurts or not? Like, have you just been taught to suppress any like discomfort or, when you notice your pain, for sure. But yeah, it's like you say, a very lifelong question and one I've spent my entire life on trying to figure out as well. So we're about 3 minutes over. So I just wanted to thank you all so much for being here. I really enjoyed the conversation and thought-provoking responses. Yeah, and thank you, Austin, for posting the link in chat. I appreciate that. And if you're interested in similar webinars, you can join us next month, where on April 11th at 2 p.m., we are going to have a panel of autistic therapists talking about their experiences of being autistic therapists and how they got into that line of work. So hope to see many of y'all then. We will also send out this recording probably in about a week or so once we're able to get it uploaded. So until then, thank you all so much for being here, and I hope you all have a great day. So take it easy out there. Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you.